Hello, everyone. Wellness Whiz Jack here, and the title of our visit is Thyroid Mastery. We have a concept that many clinicians apply in natural health, and it's going to be to look at the various causes of what causes a condition. So, if we look at the thyroid, there's a complex series of causes that would each become an area to develop as far as how to support the body. So, for any symptom, such as a person might be like expressing hypothyroidism, there's probably at least 10 different causes. If we leave a cause unaddressed, we might miss being able to help someone with the nutritional support. So knowing how a tissue functions and knowing primary causes allow us to hone in and keep helping a greater and greater percentage of people. Something's really exciting has happened in the last 5 years is that with the focus on the gut microbiome, people with thyroid issues started finding that they could break free of that. So we see books that have come into the marketplace about how people have gotten over diagnoses such as hypothyroid and Hashimoto's, and even some cases of Graves' disease, which is a hyperthyroiditis, that these things now, where they were previously told were no known cause, no known cure, people are now explaining how they were able to correct and show via their blood labs that they no longer have the condition. So we've learned, empowered by epigenetics, that we do not have to accept and let's say the diagnosis is dooming a person for life. So let's just look at some facts, that the thyroid is a master metabolic gland. It regulates everything from body temperature to digestion and even cognitive ability. So it's always had a special place, along with the adrenal glands, in natural health. Just some things that we might want to know more about the thyroid as we look into this is that it has a direct bearing on the caloric consumption of a cell through the mitochondria, the oxygen usage, and brain and neuromuscular function. So a lot of times we do turn to wondering or giving questionnaires or asking questions, wondering, gee, should this person have thyroid support? Well, from the position that right now about 30 million people in the United States have some sort of thyroid issue, and about another 13 million are estimated that they have no idea about this or why it could be happening. We also see statistically that women are more affected by the thyroid concerns than men. And we also see statistics that as a person ages, that the thyroid diagnosis comes up more and more. So it becomes more common during aging. So when we hear that, we can think, oh, well, maybe this is a metabolic wearing down process, that there's the free radical damage that occurs with the thyroid, because the thyroid is a strong user of the free radical in order to construct out on the cell membrane of the thyroid cells. It constructs a molecule T4, and that thyroxine molecule does require an oxidative redox process in order to be made. So the thyroid is very interested as a gland in having fats available nutritionally, just like the brain. The brain needs the fats, and so does the thyroid. And so the thyroid will convert these fats into glucose and feed directly to the mitochondria, the energy, and by doing that, the free radical potential increases. So this is just the arena that the thyroid needs to work in. The thyroid secretes many important hormones, including calcitonin, which is works opposite, we might say, the parathyroid as far as maintaining calcium balance, whether it goes into the bone, whether it comes out of the bone. And so we also have heard of the T4 and the T3 molecules as also being important. And I think in the last 5 years, we've really seen finally some respect being given to the reverse T3, where for 30 years, at least in my awareness, medicine said that's a useless test. We don't need it for anything. It was even hard 5 years ago to get a reverse T3 run. And now we realize there's so many people that have abnormal reverse T3 that what's going on is basically their body's innate intelligence is saying, we've got to turn down the heat. We've got to turn down the energy because we're suffering too much free radical damage. So the body in its own wisdom will enter into a state of blocking the conversion of T4 to T3, the active molecule for the thyroid. It'll turn down the ATP production. The consequence is the person can feel tired, and it's prone to having fibromyalgic symptoms and poor cellular performance, poor cellular detoxification. This was intended by nature to be a temporary protective agency, but with the amount of stress that the adrenals are registering via cortisol, the thyroid gets the cortisol signal to generate reverse T3, which then slows everything down. And the problem is people don't come out. So they go years in a hypothyroid or abnormal condition. And then eventually, if that's not helped, or if that's just swept under the carpet by taking thyroid medication, which goes against the body's wisdom and tries to ramp up the production of T4, and hoping that it gets converted to T3. And then a person says, oh yes, I'm taking whether it's pig thyroid or a synthetic thyroid. They say, okay, I'm doing a little better, but then in 4 or 5 years, because the cause was not addressed, then the person starts getting deeper and deeper into fatigue. The dosage levels have to go up, and then often this evolves into an autoimmune condition. We also know that iodine is very essential to both the ability for the thyroid to make the T3 and the T4. The T4 is the storage extra iodine form that can circulate when the body needs the explosive fuel. It will convert with the liver, and some in the cell membrane, and some from the thyroid. It'll get that active T3 cranking, so a person can help have the energy necessary. So we have an issue when we deal with thyroid, is that if a person is diagnosed with Hashimoto's and has elevated thyroid peroxidase, we'll find that iodine can be very aggravating. So now we find the basis for medicine's current admonishment that if you're hypothyroid or if you have particularly Hashimoto's, you should avoid iodine. But it wasn't but 50 years ago that medicine was using iodine to cure a thyroid issue. So something shifted there, and there became a witch hunt on iodine in the diet. Iodine was used in making bread. They switched it over in the industry to bromine, which jams up the iodine receptors in the body and doesn't serve people well to be getting the bromine in the commercial bread products. But the idea is to get away from iodine. And so again, we want to understand another facet here is when I mentioned the conversion of the stored potential molecule T4, which is called thyroxine, that it's converted to the triiodithyronine, which is the T3, that conversion also happens in the gut microbiome. You see, so now we have to have respect for the liver, and we have to look at the gut microbiome in our gestalt of mastery. of the thyroid. So you've got to have optimal, even functional liver activity going on for the T3 molecule to be produced to become active. And when T3 is active, it helps with the absorption of carbohydrates and fats. It's the rate that the cells will create the cellular protein through transcription. It's the rate of food digestion to load the body with the nutrients. It's the oxygen utilization in the cells. Overall, it's energy production. So all of this with chronic fatigue and so forth often leads us back to the thyroid and to this fundamental life process. Most of the thyroid hormone in the bloodstream is bound to a protein, a carrier molecule. And so it's really the unbound T3 molecule that's the spark for the cell. Now, this thyroid hormone production is often thought to be under the mastery of the pituitary gland, and that's important, but it's also controlled via the hypothalamus and the pituitary connection. So the brain is having to assess, or these glands help assess what's going on. The gut-brain connection, we're getting information about the conversion of T4 to T3 by the gut microbiome. Via the liver, molecules and enzymes and actual levels of thyroid hormone in the blood, the brain, hypothalamus, pituitary, get this information, and then the pituitary tells through TSH, thyroid stimulating hormone, tells the thyroid what the daily workload is. You know, here's how much we need. So if we look a little bit further in this, we get into the concept of dopamine, which is a neurotransmitter which stimulates the hypothalamus to release the TSH, thyroid stimulating hormone, and it's how the hypothalamus influences the T3 production. And so to have the hypothalamus working right, the amino acid tyrosine is important. So even back 50 years ago, many thyroid supportive products wanted the tyrosine or freeform tyrosine available. This has been able to help some people. Other people, it was knocking on the not the correct door. But generally, tyrosine has held as if it's in deficiency, there can be the thyroid issues. If not, then it's not the right tree to bark up for helping the thyroid. We should also look at the fact that stress is going to hit the thyroid. And this, again, is through that reverse T3 aspect where the body wants to have a check and balance. One might surmise that if you didn't have the ability to make reverse T3, that might be some of the basis for what's called spontaneous human combustion, that if there's no rods in the nuclear reactor that absorb radioactivity, if there's no reverse T3 to slow it down, then theoretically a cell could just, you know, put the throttle down until the engines burn up. And so, but stress is going to limit the thyroid's ability. Now, so basic hypothyroidism is an underproduction of thyroid hormone, basically. And when it's autoimmune driven of something attacking the thyroid and some of the processes, particularly the free radical damage, thyroid peroxidase enzyme that's needed to make the T3, then the person has fatigue, sensitivity to the cold, excessive weight gain, poor circulation, dry skin. They're often having eczemas, loss of hair from heads that previously would sport a nice full head of hair, and even depression and poor digestion. And so about 1 in 1,000 people, particularly leaning toward women, can be in the hyperthyroidism. And this will be a very fast metabolic rate, the tendency to need to multitask, you can find the person says, I had the TV on, I was listening to the radio, I was doing the chores in the kitchen, and I was doing 3 things at once. And they can get into the thyroid producing even a goiter as the gland enlarges, trying to get more blood supply through in order to be able to impact the body with its either need, hypo need, for more thyroid hormone, or to accommodate the hyper need. And so we can have the enlargement of the gland. One thing to keep in mind in today's world is that iodine is the magic molecule. But today, if we encounter fluorides and chlorides, that these can result in the inability of the thyroid to produce T4. Now, heavy metals are right here in with this, that the mercury from the dental fillings, some of the heavy metal chemicals in the air also can jam up these metabolic pathways that are so important to get nutrients to perform their function. So in this case, we turn an eye to many municipal water supplies where they put chlorine in the water, which then can block some of the iodine receptors. These are halogens, and they have an affinity for the same receptors, but when chlorine blocks the thyroid receptors, then the iodines are not working correctly. The thyroid is not working correctly. The cellular metabolism gets interfered with. What's probably happened over the last 50 years of chlorinating municipal water supplies, which was done in good faith to prevent cholera epidemics and massive issues through waterborne illnesses. We understand the trade-off, but for some people, the chlorine is interfering with their thyroid. Now, we come to another subject in the water, the fluoride. It came to pass that the idea was sold to municipalities that they needed to put fluoride in their water to protect all the little children's teeth. Now, we know often that in the literature circulated in natural health that the aluminum industry had a terrible poisonous waste product called fluoride, and they needed to get rid of it. And it's very expensive to get rid of, so they spread it out over the U.S. population under the guise of doing a favor to protect the teeth. True studies on fluoride show it's the wrong form of fluoride. It's not the plant bound type fluoride, that this stannous type fluoride is just a toxic halogen, and it also fills these thyroid receptors, and it's also accused of making teeth brittle and modeling the color of teeth. And it statistically has shown that, hey, everybody's still getting tooth decay because of eating sugar, that the fluoride wasn't the fix-all nor the issue. Now in the 21st century, we find some city organizations refusing fluoride, and there's campaigns in many cities to try to get the city fathers to cut off the fluoridation of water because of the glaring statistics that it lowers IQ when these energy systems are shut down. So the fluoride in the water, many people wish to avoid. In hypothyroidism, we also see that the cellular and stomach hydrochloric acid is reduced. And thus we can start having a malabsorption of nutrients because of the lack of hydrochloric acid. If a person had some H. pylori involved in the stomach as well, then here's a recipe for many concerns regarding a person, their aging process, their enzyme faculties, and again, looking to the thyroid. Historically, medicine was just looking at the TSH, and probably one of the most useless thyroid markers, and so a lot of this hypothyroidism and Hashimoto slipped under the rug. It was through the Dr. Broda Barnes of the Broda Barnes Foundation that so much of this issue with the thyroid was being discovered. And now today they're much more likely that a physician is going to order a complete thyroid panel with things like free T4, free T3, reverse T3, and even hopefully a thyroid peroxidase. That's the most glaring of 3 thyroid antibodies or autoantibodies, where we can find that a person has a greater issue going on. And then we have our newly discovered research that out of the gut microbiome, if there's chronic inflammation, maybe from eating hybridized wheat, maybe having leaky gut, having pathogens in the gut, that raises the set point of inflammation. And then there's often the confusion of the immune system to attack parts of the thyroid or the thyroid processes, such as the thyroglobulins, and it'll be attacking that and creating an autoimmune, or what will end up being called a Hashimoto's often. So the important nutrients, we have to consider what to do with iodine, what to do with tyrosine, B vitamins, vitamin A. A big mineral for the thyroid is selenium and zinc. And gosh, essential fatty acids. These are our core of nutrition when we start looking at the thyroid. Where's the selenium? Where's the zinc? Where's the fatty acids? We find so many people coming from a fat-free diet or a low-fat diet that their thyroid has just been starved for the fatty acids it needs to perform well and to perform without damage due to having proper vegetable-based antioxidants. The other thing of concern with the thyroid, it is part of an intricate check and balance system of the body. So just throwing a drug at the thyroid is often maybe not the best place to look for a point of leverage. The thyroid has to work even with the gonads. It has to work with the adrenals, with the pituitary, the hypothalamus. See? And so, and it has a strong governance over estrogen, testosterone, progesterones. So here we see that in the delicate and extensive network of endocrine glands, a person should think twice before throwing a suppressive or activating medication at just one little facet without understanding the holistic person. I mean, and this is where we can come into another key aspect of understanding the thyroid, and that is the emotional or post-traumatic stress incidences. That a person who has suffered grief often can go into a thyroid issue, and often it seems to go to the hyper or Graves' disease side of things. So historically, when a person has a hyperthyroid, a flip-flop thyroid where they're mostly hypo, but on occasion it flips into hyper. They get the heart palpitations and revved up and hot flashing, too much heat, and then all of a sudden then they crash down into the fatigue that we really have to be looking at what is going on, when did this start, what was going on right before it started. And we often find there can be a death of a loved one, a setback in life, a loss of employment, a house burns down, you know, these big events in life where a person is just pushed too hard. And that's when something clicked. Now, what clicked is an epigenetic response. And the healing comes from addressing the past traumas. And finally, I think we have to reiterate here that we have to look at the gut microbiome. In fact, I would even propose for our natural health model that we first consider the gut microbiome, that we make sure the set point of inflammation that radiates throughout the body, the hyperactive vigilance of the immune system, that can be calmed down. by supporting beneficial gut microbiome. So let's look at some things and understand what is going on. We'll find that many people, such as Dr. David Brownstein, who's employing iodine in his practice of thyroid therapies, will use generous amounts of iodine now as part of how he is proceeding. Yet, as I mentioned earlier, if we bring in iodine errantly too soon, or someone has an undiagnosed disease that medicine would say is labeled Hashimoto's or something like that, we would find that iodine can be quite aggravating, because iodine will stir the thyroid. It will promote the thyroid to make more and more and use more and more free radicals. And the free radicals cause more damage. And the free radical damage brings in the immune system to say, hey, there's a lot of bad cells here. This could go into something that medicine might call a adenoma or something. So the body steps in and tries to turn it down, and the immune system starts attacking. And so this is not a good situation. And if the roots of that situation are in the gut microbiome, now the roots of this issue are right smack in the bailiwick of natural health practitioners who've taken the time to study the gut microbiome and its influence over things like the thyroid. We also find from the alternative functional medicine doctors that the selenium is extremely important. And we can find too that if a person just has an elevated TPO, thyroid peroxidase, and they have an elevated antibody to thyroid peroxidase, that as they are deficient in selenium, as they build their selenium values, the TPO goes down, down, down. And then we find in these functional medicine practitioners, when they know the TPO can go down, they very judiciously, according to their methods, work with the iodine. I want to start with the TPO formula, thyroid metabolic iodine. This would be the formula that we would have to keep an eye on, that we would want to use judiciously, and not for people that are at the get-go, for people who are Hashimoto's, again, because it can stir up the thyroid and create more damage. So that goes against the Hippocratic oath that we in natural health follow, which is first and foremost, do no harm. So we're looking at supporting selenium, and then when we get around, if we know we can safely employ and use it as a proper tool, the iodine, then we find the historic precedents from Dr. Lugol, where Lugol had his ratio of iodine to iodide that would be supplemented by the body. So there was some ready-to-go iodine. There was also the much-needed iodide that the body can put through its normal, natural processes. So often we find that people have a functional iodine deficiency, and eventually we have to get to the, now in today's world, the grossly underutilized iodine therapies, and look at its relationship to tyrosine, selenium. Now we're just getting some of the ingredients that if a person is deficient, of course their thyroid is going to misbehave. All of this is accounted for in the TMI formula, thyroid metabolic, that is just such a beautiful formula to use at the right time. We should also keep in mind that iodine is just not about the thyroid. Iodine is about bone health. Iodine is about breast health. Iodine is about uterus and endometrial health. Iodine is also, from the old text, one of the nutrients that supports the body's normal natural resistance to cells that might become rogue cells and not go into apoptosis properly. So iodine, we learned in the United States, if a person is from the Midwest, that's the goiter belt, that they are just grossly short of iodine, obviously because they're not close to the seashore, where iodine is in the air, where iodine is in the seaweed, where iodine is coming up from the churning of the waves on the shore as they become oxygenated. And so oftentimes we're most likely to find rampant iodine deficiencies. You couple that with the use or people's use of tap water and fluoridated tap water. We just have so many things now where diet is not providing iodine, and then now that's the counsel that it's medicine is not going there like they used to replace the missing iodine with people. And so we have this large scale iodine deficiency, same for selenium deficiency, that these things can need to be addressed nutritionally. I'll point to the GF thyroid formula now. It's very low in iodine, but it does have dulse, kelp, and so bladderwrack. It has sea vegetation in it, which carries some iodine molecules. When Dr. Wheelwright made the GF formula, he made it and pronounced it safe and helpful to people, even with long-term thyroid issues. We think of the GF thyroid as supporting the tissue integrity of the thyroid. What's a few nutrients that support the thyroid as a tissue, not supports the thyroid as a manufacturing plant of T4 and some T3 and calcitonin for the balance of calcium in the bones. We find that the GF is supporting the quality of the tissue. We also should be looking at the GB pituitary when we get clues that there might be the pituitary's oversight of instructions for the thyroid stimulating hormone, the signal coming from the hypothalamus. The hypothalamus is often addressed by the formula #1 activator. So in looking at the gestalt of endocrine support, then we can look at the adrenals too. That the adrenals, if a person is under stress, and who isn't, the adrenals may be upping the cortisol, which changes the gut microbiome to a more inflammatory pattern, and it impacts the thyroid to maybe quiet down a little bit, to raise the RT3, to slow down thyroid processes until the body can recover. A very excellent formula that we should have in our sewing basket, so to speak, our bailiwick for supporting the thyroid. It can be the Moore's formula, the methyl donors. #1, it's got the RDA of selenium in it. So Moore's is a great way to provide the 200 micrograms of selenium and start boosting the presence of selenium. If the body is locked into perpetual stress, then the methyl donors are being used up at an alarming rate. So giving the folate, the methyl tetrahydrofolate, and the methylcobalamin is just perfect to help the body maintain and replenish the methyl molecules that it needs. So the Moore's factors is a wonderful formula for functional selenium deficiency and the vitamin B12 and B9 forms that are needed by the thyroid, needed by the cells for cellular metabolic conversions, and therefore Moore's is just handmade for the thyroid. Now, let's look at some phospholipids, because in the process of making the thyroid hormones, there's a lipid peroxidase that occurs, which are free radicals, draws in inflammation. Heavy metals and halogens gum up this situation, meaning the chloride, the fluorine, the fluoride, the bromine, Bromine might be not only from commercial bread, but it can also be released in various chemicals like the new leather smell in the car seats or the leather couch and out of the carpet that are outgassing poisons into our homes. Bromine can be one of those, as well as the hot tub that's not using chlorine. And give a person more blockage of the thyroid receptors. Now, the membranes are really the key. The mitochondrial membranes, but also the plasma membranes of the thyroid, because this is where some of the manufacturing process is done. So we have to have good functional transcriptions going on within the mitochondrial to the DNA of the thyroid cells, and these have to be maintained. It's very interesting that one specific fatty acid called cardiolipin is important, and a person could consider a nutritional aspect like a CVO, the cardiovascular oil, as providing a much needed element. Now, cardiovascular is very important. Cardiovascular health is to the thyroid, particularly if someone has been medically diagnosed as having an enlarged thyroid or nodules or a goiter, because now we want to be sure the body has the molecules it's looking for where it can normalize thyroid processes and then function normally and not need to be enlarging. We mentioned earlier the mitochondria, and of course energy is driving this process. Without, let's say, many volts of electricity, without many molecules of ATP, the thyroid can't get its job done well. And so now we look at a formula, the E-energy, the mitochondrial support, that we want to have the mitochondria be able to perform its beta oxidative processes. This is where it's going to take a molecule of fat and turn it into some glucose in order to prime the pump on the Krebs cycle to grind out the miracle of ATP in life. And it's also important that this process is also utilized in the fatty bilayer of these membranes, and that's where the magic happens. Also, in the case of thyroid storms, there's research that points to damage to these membranes, and nutritional fatty acids are required for normal thyroid function. We want to look at the GA adrenal. We want to look at stress, basically, through that mechanism, and we want the adrenals to be able to relax, not produce so much of the stress hormones, the cortisol, the epinephrine, the norepinephrine, that are going to be read by the gut microbiome, and then the body is locked into this fight or flight. At first, the thyroid may want to provide lots of energy so we can run. As things become fatigued and there's free radical damage, then the electricity has to go down. We can look at the antioxidants that are needed because a shortage of antioxidants means that the thyroid can damage itself. This is a great time to not only mention the G-cell or glutathione, which is certainly one of the most excellent formulas for the thyroid antioxidants, but also what is going on with the EPIC formula, which is actually made specific to the mitochondria and the process of the making of the ATP and the role of the pyrroloquinoline, sorry for the pronunciation there, I always call it PQQ, that we need things like PQQ, glutathione, catalase, superoxide dismutase, coenzyme Q10, a lot of these things that are innate in the EPIC formula that it's looking at the no-ono cycle of making the peroxidase specifically. That is the issue with the thyroid peroxidase elevating, causing inflammation and attracting the immune system. So I love to see G-Cell and EPIC both in a good thyroid program. Now, if we look a little bit at the heavy metals subject, we realize not only do we have the gut microbiome, but a person may have acquired heavy metals that are engaging aberrant behaviors within the mitochondria, within the cell, within the cellular transcriptive process, and that these heavy metals are generators of free radical damage, again, alerting the immune system. So many people, in looking at supporting proper thyroid, are not just stuck or hung up in the endocrine system. They have a gut microbiome element. They have a heavy metal detox element. And as you look at some of these formulas, the free radical support, the methylation support, the glutathione support, we realize that we are automatically supporting the gentle removal of some of these heavy metals that can damage the mitochondria and lend toward the thyroxine resistance at the cellular level. And this really brings up the point for us that while we're looking at the thyroid, everybody says thyroid, they look right here. But the blood work is coming from here. And based on that, we really need to include the gestalt of what's going on at every cell membrane, at the cell's ability to have some small conversions of T4 to T3, at the liver's massive conversion of T4 to T3, and the gut microbiome's massive conversion, and that all of these systems need to be talking together. This is our holistic model, and we look at that in light of emotional traumas that the person has not gotten over. It doesn't mean that a person went through a trauma, because most people have. It's that the person has not gotten over, that life changed. We call that an NWS, never well since. And that person has never been well since a trauma. Then a couple years later, they're looking at the thyroid. And so as we bring this whole model together, we find gut microbiome support, heavy metal support, we find endocrine support, and then we look at the specific metabolic processes of the thyroid. And on one hand, we often have to remove things that don't belong in a healthy body. The halogens, bromine, fluorine, fluoride, chlorine, these things from wrong sources, let's say from chemistry set sources, as opposed to normal, natural plant sources. Everybody needs fluoride to build bones, but we need the kind of fluoride that comes from diet, that comes from plants, not a toxic waste product from the aluminum industry dumped in our water, whether we want it or not. Particularly after the statistics show that it's not solved anything as far as reducing visits to the dentist. Now, having covered that, we ought to consider a model for what do we do here in the 21st century. One, would be good to say we need to build the liver. If we build the liver, we build the ability to convert T4 to T3, and that the body metabolically can work. If we build the liver, it will detox the body better on its own. Some people will have enough heavy metal and chemical exposure that they really need to engage a detoxification program as a stepping stone to getting to the hidden causes of why the thyroid. We need to work the liver. We might be needing to look at detox processes through the extracellular matrix, the lymphatics, and generally got to get in inside the cells. And this is where the intracellular glutathione processes are so very, very important. As we look at this overall gestalt in natural health, we find that we're not just targeting, like with a telescope or a microscope, in on the thyroid and looking at blood work that's only about the thyroid. We're looking at, okay, the thyroid could be performing just fine, just the way the body says it should. The body thinks everything is fine. The problem is in the conversion of T4 to T3. Well, that's not done so much in the thyroid. It's done in the liver. It's done in the gut microbiome. So you see, we've had to expand our model into holism. We have to figure if someone has that emotional trauma. Now we have body-mind connection. We have the gut-brain, brain-gut, gut-thyroid connection activity going. We have the liver-gut, liver-brain, liver-thyroid connection going. And it's really not horrendously complicated. It's often step one, the gut microbiome. Step two, liver detoxification support. Step three, really focus in on the thyroid. And the best way to focus in on the thyroid is often broad blanket support on these topics. Where's the antioxidants? Where's the selenium? Where's the fatty acid? Where's the cell membrane support? Where's the ATP support? Where's the brain oversight? Like often a formula like Neurosin could wake that up. What are we looking at with hypothalamus pituitary thyroid axis rather than the hypothalamus pituitary adrenal axis? These things dovetail. So now we really have a three-step program: gut, liver, and detox, and thyroid whole body nutrition, not just poking and being blindsided or having the blinders on about what's going on with the minutia of the thyroid. The minutia of the thyroid will be fouled up with the nutrient deficiencies, liver issues, gut issues, post-traumatic stress issues. All of this comes through and impacts the cellular metabolic activities epigenetically. When we throw our broad net and we line up a program, 1, 2, 3, and we do finally get there, and we look at like a TPO enzyme, if the person is ordering a blood test, you see that TPO come down from the hundreds to 40 to 20s, and then get down in the teens, and then we can initiate more judicious nutrients and address the role of the iodines and so forth. Now we have a matrix or a design that we can go through where in a mere 3, 4 months, even 6 months, a person can get their endocrine system nicely operative, their energy turned on. Often some situations with things like chronic fatigue, fibromyalgias, type things that are all associated with low ATP production as a conscious decision of the body to do, not as something errant. I think the body's innate wisdom is trying to control things here, but as long as we do not address the cause, we are not helping the body where it is stuck. And the body needs to be able to address these causes. And if the onslaught of the environment or the emotional aspect has never been dealt with, then we can give nutrients or tyrosine or selenium all day long, and we will not get the proper impact. People, as they write their books now, of which there's several at Amazon, about how I made my thyroid healthy again, we see that everything they're doing is natural health. The reversal statistics from natural health are far superior to the statistics of other modalities that are not addressing the cause, but just trying to manipulate, let's say, a blood value of T3 or and that type of thing. So we really have a dividing line between our holistic therapies and other types of therapies where we want to address the whole person with a strategy and look at all of these causes, all of these areas to support, versus then just a raw manipulation of, oh, you're low in this, take more, without ever asking why. Why did the body choose to go into hypothyroidism? The reason that question seems not to be asked is because it always points back to errant thinking, meaning like post-traumatic stress. It points to errant diet. It points to errant activities, whether it's the electromagnetic resonance from holding a cell phone up here, whether it's the sloppy work behind an x-ray machine, where several times I've personally witnessed the failure to give a thyroid shield when shooting x-rays of the chest or the head, and we get the oxidative DNA damage from the environment and the heavy metals. So here we go. Now the big subject is all in a nutshell, 1, 2, 3 step. I hope that you're able to step in and help more and more people help their bodies do what their bodies are begging to do, and that's remove the cause that's causing the effect that's unwanted, and allowing that body to engage its own self-healing through its own normal, natural processes. That's what we do in clinical nutrition. That's what we do as herbalists. That's what we do as functional medicine practitioners. Thank you so very much.